in terms of giving advice to students, there is a bit of a gender imbalance in economics. Is there any extra advice you'd give for girls coming into economics and heading into the careers there?
Yeah, do it. Don't be intimidated. Females and women need to study economics and feel confident about taking and doing well in economics courses. And in most of the courses that I teach, the top students are in fact the females in the class. So economics, and it benefits the classroom experience to have a good mix of students and have diversity in the classroom, not just gender diversity, but all kinds of diversity. So it's an excellent course of study for young women. Employers are looking for smart young people trained in economics.
You know, leading on from that, you know, I learnt about economics in high school, which I'm lucky to be someone who did. But in that sort of experience, you learn about economics from sort of one perspective. So given that you are known for being a modern monetary theorist, which is absolutely sort of, I guess, a heterodox school of thought, would you like to just tell us about what modern monetary theory is?
But that's really important, what you say, is also diversity of ideas. That's important too. And when you take economics in high school, probably you're assigned a textbook and you have one teacher and you learn some economics, and that's fine. But then when you get to university, that's where you get an opportunity to confront lots of different professors. And hopefully, when you do that, you get professors that have different ways of thinking about things, right? And they ask and answer questions differently. And so with MMT, we ask some different questions, and a lot of the times what matters most isn't giving different answers, but asking different questions. And so one of the questions that we ask is, how should we think about governments that operate with a currency that they can issue themselves? And how does that change the way in which we think about public finance, the limits on government spending, fiscal policy, macroeconomic stabilization? So it opens up a whole bunch of additional questions, but understanding history, like understanding that in 1971 something really big happened. We changed the international monetary system. So when you study economics, you should actually get a little bit of history along the way. And then understanding that with that change in the monetary system, it should change the way we think and do economics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think one of the big things that a lot of people get confused about, I guess, from a sort of outside of economics perspective, is that modern monetary theory, it's not a policy, it's a framework and understanding. So what are the policy implications of MMT?
Well, the biggest one is that if you are a government that operates with a sovereign currency. In Australia, you have the Australian dollar. The Australian dollar is a sovereign currency. The government is the issuer of the Australian dollar. And the implications of that are that the government does not need to run its budget the way that you and I, households, would, the way a private business would, or the way that more localized governments, state and local governments, have to operate. There's a big difference between being the user of the currency and being the issuer of the currency. And so the limits are different, right? And if you are able to issue your own currency, then you don't face the same kinds of constraints that a household faces. You don't have a revenue constraint. You don't face financial constraints. There are limits, and the limits are what are really important. There are real limits to how much a government can safely spend, how it can operate its budget. But most of the time, what we discover is that governments, in spite of having more fiscal firepower, are often too afraid to run their policy in the maximum interest of benefiting the economy, because they worry about things like budget deficits and the national debt. And it's mostly because they are failing to really understand the nature of the monetary system.
And so basically in the end we sort of end up, I guess, using the economy to balance budgets rather than using our budget to balance our economy.
Yeah, we operate chronically below our potential. You know, you often hear politicians talk about governments living within their means. Well, we live well below our means as a nation, right? We're not operating at our maximum efficiency, and that means that there's waste involved, right? It's inefficient, it's wasteful, it's costly, and it's burdensome to the economy as a whole. So what we want to do is try to get our policymakers and, you know, other economists to start thinking about what's important. And what's important are the real outcomes, the human outcomes, right? Not the budget outcome. And until we get that right, we're going to continue to set the wrong targets. So we're going to focus on trying to balance the government budget. And how do we do that? Well, we say to put the government budget in balance, we need to cut spending, we need to raise taxes, and those things can actually work against you. And so you end up with a worse economy because you're fiddling around trying to force the government budget into balance. So you get a very unbalanced economy for the purpose of trying to balance the budget. And MMT tries to get us to focus on the right things. It's the real outcomes that matter. The budget outcome isn't what's important. You can use the budget to deliver a good economy.
Yeah, well, I mean, because that's obviously not a common view when you hear about, I guess, yeah, I mean, our current government going for surplus and everything like that. But in that sort of sense, where did you come about MMT? You know, because I guess you mightn't have started that way. So yeah, when did it enter your life?
When I was a graduate student at Cambridge University, and I first encountered, and it wasn't called MMT back then, it was just really a man who came from the finance community. He was an investor. He had written a little booklet, and he was thinking about things in a very different way, probably because he didn't have the economic training, and so he hadn't been taught to think in one way. He dealt with financial markets, and so he was accustomed to thinking along, you know, operations, monetary operations. And his name's Warren Mosler. And when I first started reading Warren's work, it seemed completely backwards to me. I thought he was absolutely wrong. But I started reading and asking a lot of questions and talking to people at Treasury and the Fed, and I just started connecting up the dots and basically convinced myself that this guy who'd been working in financial markets for a long time might know a little bit more than I did as a graduate student, and so it changed my thinking.